I'm Scott Allen Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. Today in the Expats group, we were talking about cars, and there's a different aspect of vehicles I think is worth mentioning because as expats come to Nicaragua, we tend to make some pretty wild decisions, especially when we first get here and we set ourselves up for failure. We talk about that a lot, but this is an aspect of vehicles that we don't normally talk about. In fact, I'm not sure we've ever really focused on. It's always been just a casually mention as we talk about other things. Now, of course, we got lots of videos where we discuss whether or not you should be driving at all. And the answer for anyone who's new to the country really is no. You should not be driving for quite some time. There's so many reasons you need to hold off on that, whether it's difficult to get your vehicle purchased, not understanding the market prices, not understanding what vehicles are practical, not being 100% sure that this is where you're going to be staying, and so forth. Those are things that need to be overcome before you even talk about buying a vehicle. That being said, there is a thought process around what vehicles we want to own that is worth discussing because this is something that new expats routinely think something very different than those of us who've been around for a while. So we're going to dig into that right after the bump. The majority of expats here in Nicaragua are coming from North America, specifically Canada, most in the United States second. Everything else combined doesn't come close to those two groups. And coming from that part of the world, we are used to the idea that cars and vehicles that we purchase are an expression. We go out and buy something that it says something about us. I had the infamous 2003 Mazda PR5 Zoom car in that beautiful bright yellow. I had a red Mazda RX-7 convertible. These cars said something about my personality, and I chose them carefully. These are cars that I sought out and ordered and waited for and made sure I got in 5-speed configurations and really took care of. The idea that a car is this extension of yourself is a big deal in North America. And when North Americans and some Western Europeans, Germans and Brits definitely have some of the same feelings, you get a little bit less, but still some in Italy and France and Spain. When we move to new countries, this is something that's often ingrained in us. It's a part of our culture that is very intrinsic, and we don't really think about it very much. We're used to going to car shows. We're used to new car announcements being a big deal. We're used to dreaming about cars and very specifically choosing cars that we want. When living in a place in Latin America, for example, much of the third world, if you're living around Africa, vehicles are a practicality. The idea that you would have a car for pleasure is both not part of the culture and also not exactly something that is seen as a positive. In North America, where we build cars, often it is seen as, supporting the economy, or we don't really think about the ecology in that way. Because we don't really have public transportation, we absolutely need a vehicle to go to work or whatever. So the idea that you're going to have that vehicle be a little bit expressive is completely okay, right? The difference between getting a vehicle that is a little bit more your personality or a little bit less has a generally pretty minor impact differential on the environment. But when you're coming to a place like Nicaragua, where the majority of people do not drive, and those who do mostly use scooters and motorcycles, and when people do have vehicles, larger vehicles, cars and trucks, it is a heavy number are taxis. And beyond that, the number of vehicles are very much about practicality. Everything in the Nicaraguan driving world is about practicality. That's not to say that you will never see a vehicle that isn't practical. It does happen. I've seen 2 or 3 Jeeps. I've seen a Camaro. My wife says she saw a Corvette recently. But just seeing these is such a big deal. Seeing one Corvette in country, and I did see a Corvette, I should say, back in 2021. It's probably the same one. We all stop and go, wow, someone has so much money and so much influence that they can throw away, say, $100,000, which is probably what it costs them to get an entry-level Corvette down here, and they can pay for the security necessary to be able to maintain that car. Because if you drive a car that can be noticed, you've got some additional problems in a market where everything's about practicality. But before we get into that, so the idea that you even own a vehicle here is a mark of affluence or absolute need. If you're a taxi driver, for example, that would not be a mark of affluence. It would be a point of this is my job and I'm trying to maximize how much I'm able to earn by owning the vehicle and maintaining it and caring for it myself. That makes a lot of sense. If you work on a farm and you got to have a pickup truck, then you'll have an old diesel pickup truck that's very dirty, it's dented, you're throwing things in the back, That's something you're using for work. If you need to commute and you need to do really, things that you just couldn't do with public transportation, then you'll probably have a Yaris or similar really small car, the Nissan Sentra maybe, where you get really good gas mileage in the cities. It's really easy to park and they're very low cost. When you start deviating from this, it is not like the United States where people just go, ooh, what cool car did you get? Everyone's got a car. It's not a showing off that you have one. Here, when someone gets a car that they don't need, it truly is showing off. It's flaunting how much money can be spent, and it's dangerous as expats because we often move and think, well, we're not very wealthy. We were maybe lower middle class in the United States. We don't have lots of money. At no point in our lives have we sat around and thought about ourselves as being super affluent. When you come to a place like Nicaragua, you may represent an extremely wealthy person in that 1% range, right? We talk about that in the United States. We talk about the 1%ers and how they own everything, right? And people have animosity towards them, right? There was entire votes done to punish the 1% during the Obama administration, right? That became a big mantra. It's kind of changed a little bit now. Now we're talking about the 0.01%, but that 1% made people super angry. And that's 1 out of 100 people. That's not an incredibly difficult number to hit. And when you're an expat living in Nicaragua, it is very easy in many different aspects of culture and life and finances to fall into that 1% number. So that you may have an amount of money in comparison to the people around you to fall into the 1% category is not at all surprising. And if you treat it in a way that doesn't make sense, if you're very much like blending into the culture, you're here, yes, you may be making more money than everyone else, but if you're, making a point of living in Nicaragua, no one's going to, one, be aware of that. No one's going to notice that because it's not a thing to go around flaunting your money. But if you come down and start being like, I can show off that I have more money, and it may not be things that you realize, but they're coming from North American culture, they are showing off, right? And so buying vehicles that are unnecessary is one form of showing off, but buying vehicles that are incredibly non-practical is extreme a way to show off. Now, not every vehicle can be visibly told whether it's practical or not, right? Maybe you have a pickup truck, but you're commuting somewhere, so it's not practical for commuting. Maybe no one's going to notice, right? But if there are certain types of vehicles that are never practical, right? And like I said, things like Jeeps, Camaros, Corvettes, any sports car, muscle car, or open vehicle that has no particular practical purpose, just fun recreation vehicles that you're then using as commuting or driving to the store vehicles, those kinds of things are definitely flaunting the wealth. Nicaraguans, even really rich Nicaraguans, can rarely go out and buy vehicles that have no particular purpose. A few can. Normally, when someone is doing that, they are extremely aware of the fact that they are flaunting their wealth. They generally have compounds and staff that will protect themselves and their vehicles. Same as in the United States. If you're at that point where you're driving Lamborghinis around, Ferraris around, because that's the equivalent we're talking about here, right? If you're going out and getting a Jeep here in this market, that's much like getting a Lamborghini in the United States. Doable. If it's really something that you cared about, you could save up and make it happen, but it would be a crippling amount of money to a normal American. It would be very, very difficult to ever be able to pull that off. Same thing here, going out and getting a Jeep will be generally possible by people who are in the middle classes, but it would be a crippling amount of money. It would take years of savings and then years of debt, and it would destroy your life in general from a financial perspective. So think of it in that sense. If you are driving a Lamborghini in the United States, you make yourself a target in the same way that driving a Jeep here in Nicaragua would make you a target. And that may be difficult to really comprehend, but in the US, if you're at that category where you're driving super expensive cars, you suddenly start not parking them on the street. You start only driving them on certain roads. You have to do really extreme things to keep them safe because everyone wants to look at, touch, steal your car. So you're not going to go into certain neighborhoods. You're not going to go into certain types of drives, whatever. And your house, if you were to leave that outside, one, you don't want to leave a vehicle like that outside, obviously. But you also have this problem that it flags your house as being a place of extreme affluence. So by driving a vehicle that's so flashy, it makes it a little bit easier for someone to say, hey, this person who's showing off all the time and flaunting lives in this house. And here in Nicaragua, we generally don't see the inside of houses or compounds. So knowing which places are rich or poor or flaunting or integrating is often unknown. Not 100% of the time, but generally. You get down to San Juan del Sur, that starts changing a little bit on the coast, but you also have more one percenters in one place. And so it's a slightly different thing. But if you're in most of the country, anyone who is in the 1% or higher category is living in places that you just can't tell. And I know people who are well into the 1%, probably in the 0.1% category here in the country, Nicaraguans, and they maintain completely normal house fronts in front of their compounds, and then have whole living spaces that exist in spaces that no one would guess even exist. They maintain normal city entrances and normal vehicles and everything so that nobody who isn't invited to not just go through their facade, but all the way into their house would ever know that they had anything special, right? Maybe it looks like a nicer house, like it's on the upper side of what's on the block. It doesn't detract from anyone's home values, but it's not flashy in any way. Being flashy is not a cultural thing here. Yes, being flashy with like a nice new shirt or ironed pants or a new pair of shoes, that kind of flashy does happen and is completely acceptable. But being flashy with cars is immediately met with derision. And so you have to be a little bit careful. As an expat coming in and using that bit of completely understandable culture from North America. I was the same, right? Completely understand. I was a car guy. I love cars. I would love to own many cars, have many different ones, have antiques, have new ones, lots of different. I love driving 5-speeds. I like sports cars. I like pickup trucks. I enjoy cars. So I totally understand the desire to have these things. And there's nothing wrong, particularly with going out and getting a car, but you need to understand how it will be perceived, and you need to understand why the market is the way that it is. We had friends who came down with a Jeep specifically, and this is an example I use a lot. By having a Jeep, now it was painted a little bit ostentatious, it was a nice new Jeep with a lot of custom work on it, it made it stand out even compared to a generic Jeep, but Jeeps stand out about the same no matter what you do. They came down, now they drove down, so that was a separate issue. But because they had this Jeep that is so rare on the market, and the same thing would happen if you had a Camaro or anything else, unless you are maybe a member of, you know, some really wealthy family or really well-known personality, that would, all the police would be like, whoa, no, we know who that is, don't harass them, right? Unless you're into that category, which would only be Nicaraguans, not expats. Then assume if you have a specialty vehicle, you are advertising for the police to check you on a regular basis. Now, in many cases, my friends who did this, right, they would get a very casual check. The police would pull them over because they wanted to look at their car. Not because they were checking them, not because they were suspicious, not because they were trying to cause a problem. They thought it was a friendly stop because they're police. They can pull you over. You're already slowed down to nearly stopping. And they'd be like, hey, and they pull you over and really quickly run your tags, look at your license, and be like, oh, tell me about this car. And to them, it was, this is a really neat, flashy car, and they don't see these ever. Right, so this is important. A Jeep is so flashy that the police pull you over to ogle your vehicle. In a single drive, to go renew their paperwork for their vehicle, they would often be stopped 4 to 10 times. Right, I can generally drive. My record is 5, so it does happen with no flashy vehicle. But in driving from Leon to Managua, which is what they were doing, generally I go maybe 10 to 20 trips without a single police stop. And then when I do get a police stop every 10 or 20th time, it is a really quick look at my papers, look at my car, everything's good, have a nice day. Right, it's very, very trivial. I never get asked to get out of the car. I never get asked to do anything lengthy. They just look at my paperwork and wave me on because that's what they're doing. They're just checking paperwork quickly, right? Now, one time, middle of the night, you know, they wanted to see our safety equipment. We got out and all talked because we had nothing else to do, and it's a good way to wake yourself up, right? So that's fine. But in all these times, I've never been really stopped and had to get out and talk about anything ever. And yet they would, on average, about 5 times. So I would go at least 10 trips to every one fast and easy stop. And they would do an average of probably like 3 heavy stops where they had to get out of the vehicle and have conversations for every single trip, completely reversed. So 30 to 60 times the rate that normal people are being stopped. Never gave them a problem, but it made them not want to drive anywhere because every drive meant taking way more time. Those stops would cost them 5 to 10 minutes every single time. So driving to Managua, which takes us an hour and 45 minutes, would automatically take them 2.5 hours and involve getting out. And every time you're a little bit nervous, well, the police are stopping me. They could find a problem. They could perceive something wrong. Never did, but it could happen. It makes you a little bit nervous when it happens over and over again. So a Jeep, as a very specific, seemingly innocuous vehicle, is so extremely flashy and rare here on the market that it causes problems for people who have them. Right? Now, I've only known 3 in the country in all the time that I've been here, and 1 never leaves the side road here. Right? It's literally driving around on dirt roads, just moving people between the grocery store and a place out on a dirt road. It's almost practical for where it goes because it parks out in the country in a place where no one would run across it ever, except for just a handful of people in their local community. But if you're living someplace where your vehicle is going to be seen with any regularity, things that you really want to avoid under normal circumstances is anything that you would call a cool vehicle, flashy, head turner, specialty. Anything that stands out is exactly what all of us who have been here and know what we're doing, are experienced in the country, and the Nicaraguans would want to avoid. We want vehicles that draw no attention. Vehicles that draw attention make you a target for people who are in poverty and are looking for someone to reliably, we talk about how safe houses are, but we don't worry about break-ins. We worry about petty theft. We worry about someone checking our car doors to make sure that they're locked or unlocked, right? Someone may not take a risk checking a Toyota Yaris, right? What are the chances there's money in there? But you have a flashy vehicle? Well, there's a good chance something's in there, right? People are going to check if you remember to lock your doors that much more. People might follow you somewhere. There, at some point, you are inviting crime, and that shouldn't be something you have to worry about. But just like in the U.S., you can't be flashy and not invite crime. It's going to happen, right? So that's an unfortunate truth of reality, but there's nowhere in the world where you can get away from that. Yeah, if you live in, Rome and you drive a Ferrari, you're much less likely to have a problem because there's so many rich people in one spot, and Ferraris cost half as much as they do here. There's places where you can get away with it. You live in Beverly Hills, it's not going to be a problem. Live in isolated communities. But when you start using it as your vehicle to drive somewhere, or you live in normal communities, it's going to be a problem. So the same thing here, you can't get away with it. Yeah, it's safer than the US, but it's only so much safer. We can't get away from crime. So if you have one of those vehicles, you make yourself a target to be watched. So if you take that vehicle home, you take your family somewhere in that vehicle, people will follow you. You make it easy to identify where you are at all times. Everybody can casually keep track of your whereabouts. They know when your house is empty. They know where your family is. These are not things you want to advertise and make a point of, right? So you want to be really careful about, if you're going to get a flashy vehicle, you need to really understand the level of flash that you are doing in a market that is very poor, and you are presumably expats. So going out and attempting to stand out, for Nicaraguans, they know what standing out means. If they're going to make that decision, they're making it with their eyes wide open under normal circumstances, and they know what potential dangers they may be inviting, what complications they may be inviting, and they know what protections they may have. Maybe they have great lawyers, maybe they have contacts, maybe who knows. But for you as an expat, you are simply making yourself stand out dramatically in a situation where that's the last thing you would logically want to do. That is not the behavior that... And this is a very general rule and something that people don't really think about. But no matter where you go in the world, if you're going to move there as a foreigner, and think about living in the United States, if you had people who were expats, right, moving into the United States and went out of their way to be super flashy and make a point that they were foreigners with lots of money in the United States, we all know that that wouldn't be the safest of scenarios. If you're an expat moving to the United States, yes, you may be moving in because you've got a job as a doctor or an engineer, and under normal circumstances, you're going to do what you can to earn a lot, but keep your head down. You don't want to advertise that you're a foreigner doing really well in the United States. That never is beneficial. So because we're used to that, we should be able to then apply that to ourselves. If we become expats in other countries, we don't want to do the same thing. Just often we don't realize that we're being flashy, that we are part of the 1% when we move to a country that has a very different economic base. And so it's easy to fall into a trap of suddenly being like, oh, I can afford all these things because I have so much more buying power than I had before. Houses are so cheap, land is so cheap, cars are not so cheap, but cheaper. Suddenly it's like, oh, I can just do these things. I can throw this money around and it doesn't really hurt me financially. In fact, I'm saving so much compared to what I'm used to that it would never occur to me not to use that extra money to do these cool things with it, right? Get a flashy car or whatever. And it doesn't occur to us, if we're new, that we're doing things that really, really, really stand out, that point us out as being willing to buy vehicles that don't make any practical sense, that put us in a very visible place, which if you've been an expat here for a long time, you will eventually have a very good idea of, well, I'm okay with being that flashy. I'm okay with drawing this much attention. Everyone already knows me, so that they can follow me around, not a big deal, right? Like no matter where I go in the city, it doesn't matter what car I drive, right? The moment I'm on the sidewalk, everyone knows where I am. And that's a real thing. I walked through a hotel lobby the other day. 6 people ID'd me, stopped and said hello in one trip from door to door, inside, right from the outside door to the elevator. 6 different adult people from several different countries stopped me and said hello on that trip, right? So I'm not moving around the country without being identified at every corner. But for someone who is new to the country, that is absolutely not what you want. You want to be in a position where you understand how identifiable you are, how flashy you're being, how you're presenting yourself before you start standing out. And so this is one of those many, many things. This is one of the reasons why we say do not go out and do anything to make big decisions. Don't look at property, don't look at houses, don't look at cars, don't consider buying any of those things for a while. Yeah, there's lots of financial reasons, there's lots of just general good, smart expattery reasons for doing those things, but when you're looking at these types of aspects, you may not be aware, you're almost guaranteed not to be aware, to understand how the purchases and decisions that you make will appear to others in your community and so forth, right? Where you live in the country will reflect on you. What you drive will reflect on you. How you interact with that community will reflect on you. And it's not that these things are wrong. That's not the problem. The problem is the perception of people around you. The problem is advertising to people around you, right? There's very little home break-ins. We don't really have to worry about that. But we do have people who look for when you're not home and try to get in when you're not there and maybe steal some stuff, right? We all know that that type of theft is a real concern, right? And so that's why we have walls. It's why we're not concerned about locking our doors and having guns, but we are concerned with people hopping over our walls and trying to grab stuff out of our yard. But if you advertise that you have so much money that you're willing to throw it around, you're not worried about being flashy, you're making yourself a target in so many aspects of your life that's something that we really want to avoid until we understand it. And when you're around new expats who are just moving in, everyone's kind of in the same boat. Wow, we're used to being flashy like this. It seemed like I know someone else who did it, right? But when you're in those communities, generally you're finding people who are double, triple paying for everything. They're getting gringo priced all the time. And that's another thing, is that it's not just about safety things. It's that you've advertised that you're not price conscious, right? And in many cases, not price aware. You're not using practicality as a reason for purchasing things in the way that Nicaraguans do. Nicaraguans don't buy houses because they're cool. They buy them because they're the right house for them. They don't buy cars because they're cool. They buy them because it's used for their work or their how to get to job or moving their family around, right? They're practical in large purchases. They have to be. It's not because of a cultural thing to dislike affluence. It's simply that there isn't a lot of affluence, and so practicality rules the day out of necessity. But if you don't have that same constraint on your life, then the way that you spend tends to reflect on you and makes you stand out. Standing out in ways that are not attempting to integrate with the community, attempting to stand out in a way that you are showing off. Nothing particularly wrong with it, but it is generally not seen as wise, especially if you are new to any place. To make a point, we talked about this with someone who moved here and immediately tried to get in everyone's face, wanted to be the flashy guy, wanted everyone to pay attention to him, wanted to be the influencer, the connector. He didn't know how anything worked. He didn't take time. He didn't have interest, right? And he made such a point of pointing everyone to himself. He didn't put his head down. He didn't take time to learn anything, and it bit him in the end. Doing things like this. Yes, if you're here and you understand your decisions and all the things that go with it, then you can make those decisions. When you are brand new, all I can do is give you the recommendation. It doesn't matter how much it feels like this is something you want to do. It doesn't matter how much it seems like, well, why can't you just do that? It's going to backfire on you. You're going to pay too much. It's going to draw attention to you in negative ways. It's going to make integrating harder. It's going to make your desire to be here less. And I understand some people, you move to an enclave, everyone else has flashy cars. Maybe you can get away with it, right? Maybe it'll work out for you. But every time we say that, that opens up the door that someone goes, well, I'm the special case. And therefore, they're going to do exactly those things. And like we always say, if that's what ran through your mind, that's going to guarantee you're not the special case. So this is just something, a completely different aspect of how things work here that, or anywhere, right? moving to a new country, being in a new place. You don't want to be the person drawing attention to yourself before you know what that means, how it's going to be interpreted, and so forth. You need to be knowledgeable before you make decisions, and it is so emotionally difficult to not want to make so many big decisions the instant you're on the ground. But it's not like moving to a new neighborhood within the city that you grew up in. You have lots of factors that have changed, and you need to adapt to those before you can really understand how what you're doing is going to affect you in the long run. Plus lots of other things, right? Is it just the right car for you when you first, like everything that happens when you first move generally doesn't apply once you've been in a place for a while. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. The link is in the show notes. Everything's on the screen. We also have a GoFundMe for my producer, Marcela, who has stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. We're always trying to help raise money for her and her family. Anything you need, get in the show notes, ask your questions, leave comments below, say hello, and I will see all of you tomorrow.